Hello and welcome to my channel. I'm Tiffany, a retired librarian turned homeschool mom. And before we get to the book review, I'm going to talk about something a little interesting. So, as you'll find with the book I'm going to review here, which is more of a biography, and it is, however, a picture book. Not all picture books are designed for young kids. I'm not talking graphic novels, that's a different topic. We'll get there one of these days. But more something like this. So let's go looking into this book. So this is, I'm going to badly pronounce this name, which I'm very, very sorry for, because this is a really important person. He's a very, very important person in the history of history, particularly American, African American, and, history. So this is Schomburg, the man who built a library. The author is Carole Boston Weatherford, and the illustrator is Eric, I'm going to mispronounce this, Velasquez. Badly pronouncing, just like I'm badly pronouncing this. So this is not something I would read to young children, at least not in one sitting. This is very, very long. This is meant as a history book, as an academic source. And I will show you why. The illustrations are absolutely phenomenal in here. The text is very lengthy. So this is a lot of information. So this book is technically around, you can read it with younger kids, definitely encourage that, but it could not be read by them. It's more middle elementary if you're going to be reading things. So, and you will find picture books like this. And it's something that I learned when I was working in the children's section in various public libraries. You have picture books like this that on first glance, this looks like a young children's book or a storybook. It's not. This has a lot of information in it. This has a lot of really good historical information in it. This is a very, very good book. So this book has total pages. In fact, I'll show you something else. This has references. So this has a sources and a bibliography in it. That's telling you this is a history book. This is a biography to an extent for middle elementary. I would even say middle school could go through this. This is a very good starting point for looking into the history of various different African American creators. And this man in particular, who was a collector. That was his job. That's his importance through history. He uncovered the history of the Negro, more specifically. And it is very, very interesting. So now we'll talk about who this is. So this is, and I'm going to mispronounce the first name, he went by Arthur. That was his Anglicanized name. His name is Arturo. He was Puerto Rican. He was a poor Puerto Rican guy. He was born in, let's see, I think in the 1800s. This guy's, 1874. So he was in the mid to late 1800s. He was born in San Cruz, Puerto Rico, and eventually moved to New York City. Now, he wanted to be either a doctor or a lawyer, but mysteriously, all his school records, except for kindergarten, disappeared in a fire, supposedly. So he ended up working various jobs, ended up in a bank. But what he did was he collected. Now, he was told as a young boy that Negroes had no history. It didn't exist. There was nobody worth talking about. And this inspired him to figure out if they were true. It's not at all. So it was his life's work to collect manuscripts, books, art, dig through histories to discover the African Americans and the Africans' influence on history and how it was hidden. He found poetry of an African slave girl who eventually won her freedom going to Europe. He has in his library, in his collection, which eventually bought by the Carnegie Foundation to be donated to the New York Public Library. So the New York Public Library did not have the money to buy his collection, which was massive at the time. But the Carnegie Foundation bought it for them and donated it. And eventually he donated other stuff. And near the end of his life, he was the curator of this. And it is now, I'll pull up the book here because it has a whole biography. Yeah, he donates it in, let's see, when on earth is it donated? After his, now the reason he donates it is basically his wife threatens to leave him because it's taken over his house. He was a bit of a hoarder. It's like he's collecting, it's taking over his house. So she's like, it's me and the kids or the books. Move it. So he did. So it was, let's see. Yeah, in 1926, the Carnegie Corporation buys Schomburg's, very, very sorry about that name, collection for $10,000 and donates it to the New York Public Library's Division of Negro History, Literature, and Prints. And then in, let's see, in January 1920, the Division of Negro History, Literature, and Prints in the New York Public Library's 135th Street branch opens to the public. So they open the public library in Harlem. And let's see, Schomburg dies in, where does he die here? He dies in 1938. And shortly thereafter, the branch of this Negro section of the library is renamed after him. And then is in 1972 it's designated as a research center, which means you can't check anything out if you're familiar with libraries. Essentially, it's a research library. It becomes a reference section. They don't want anybody taking stuff out. So, and then in 1980, the new Schomburg Center building opens at 515 Malcolm X Boulevard in Harlem. So eventually they move it to an entire library of its own. So again, this guy's really important. This book is really, really good. It revealed stuff that I didn't know about African American history, like, you know, Audubon, the bird guy, something that they repressed. This is something he discovered. Yeah, he was born on a French plantation. His mother was a black chambermaid. So yeah, the big bird guy was African American. He was half black. And of course they repressed this. Probably because he could pass as white, and they massively repressed this. Beethoven was rumored to have been of African descent. There was a few other people that were pretty shocking. This is what he did. He found these things. He discovered these things. He wrote about slave revolutions in Haiti, throughout the United States. He wrote about Frederick Douglass. He was married 3 times. No, he didn't get divorced, literally. He had 3 wives by the name of Elizabeth. One died about 5 years after they were married, after giving him 3 kids. The next one died several years later after giving him 2 children. And then the third one, I think she survived him. So, yeah. And she gave him 3 kids. This was the one who threatened to take the children and vamoose if he didn't get rid of the books. So, but yes. So here it is. So yes, the whitewashing of history. Here's the other one. This is the other interesting thing. Alexander Dumas was descended from slaves. So, yeah, the writer of the 3 Musketeers, which apparently he read like crazy. After hearing a review of this, I don't know why. No, I don't recommend that book. Apparently the 3 Musketeers are pretty horrible human beings. But Dumas, very important author, apparently very, very detailed, was descended from slaves. So was Audubon, though directly. His mother was black. Beethoven, the other person besides Beethoven that was mentioned, is a Russian author who was black, was Alexander Pushkin. I'm mispronouncing that probably. Who, let's see, he was kidnapped as a child in Central Africa, or his grandfather was. So this is the kind of stuff that he found. He also collected art and sculptures by African people, African Americans. He documented different authors who were first speaking out that maybe the black people should go to Liberia and just, rather than them coexisting with whites, which, yes, this was Abraham Lincoln's idea, that they could not coexist, and rather than having them equals in the United States, to send them back to Africa. That was the original plan. He was also one of the people who found Lincoln's Bible, the Bible that was presented to him during the Civil War. This Bible, I think, was given to a school. It was last seen when President Barack Obama was sworn in. So they used Abraham Lincoln's Bible. So, but he worked a very long time. He did travel a little bit trying to trace his own history. He couldn't really find anything because, again, he grew up in Haiti, Puerto Rico, not Haiti. So he was part of that African culture. He wasn't even from the American South, but he spent most of his life in New York. He was part of the Harlem Renaissance. Why he didn't go to the parties of the Roaring Twenties, he was part of that academic culture. And the people in that academic culture utilized his skills and his collection to help inspire them and further them and voice African American pride. And that's something else that's very coming apart in this book, is that's what he wanted. He wanted to let people of color know, yes, you have a history. You have heroes to be proud of. You have a rich, amazing history. It exists. That was his goal, was to uncover this, was to get rid of the whitewashing of history, where everybody from Audubon to Beethoven were denied their history. These were people who, specifically Audubon, were African American. But you never hear about that because the dominant culture, which is white, I admit that, because you cannot hide it, it exists, doesn't want to admit that another culture, and a culture they specifically suppressed, had heroes and had an impact on history. Everybody's history. Not just, there's no black and white history, at least in my opinion. It's history. It's everybody's history. It's important. You have these heroes. It shouldn't be boring white men. Now, we are homeschoolers. This is one of the reasons I'm choosing to homeschool my kids, is because I can teach this. I can let them know that this is part of history, that these people, this man who was amazing for gathering history, and he wrote about it, and it was published. Now, something else that's probably hanging out in that center is his own writings. Now, was he probably an absentee father? Yeah. Apparently, it was something very common among African Americans living in the cities, that their children were raised by relatives in the country. So that's literally what happened to the first two sets of his kids. I'm guessing the last grouping from his third wife stayed with him just by, they quote his son, that the house was completely, utterly, there were bookshelves everywhere. Technically, this man was a hoarder, but again, not clinically, because he had a reason. He was collecting things for a reason, and he eventually sold his collection to the New York Public Library. He was collecting. He was just a very avid collector of rare stuff that is still being used today. He continued to donate it. It is categorized. He categorized it by size and color. Apparently, in this book, you read that he fired a librarian for trying to categorize things using the Dewey Decimal System, which is understandable. The Dewey Decimal System is, it's Eurocentric and sexist. Yeah, it's one of those, if you were not a white Protestant male, you were inferior kind of things. So that's the Dewey Decimal System. I think it's evolved since now, but yeah. But moving on, this is a fantastic book. It is a fantastic book. You can probably read it youngest age, depending on your kids and their interest level, maybe 7. But this is something I would recommend even to high school students, particularly as a jumping off point in looking at the history of African American history and how we know a lot of this. Because again, he was looking for this stuff. And a lot of the times the book mentioned that he would get it for cheap because white historians didn't want anything to do with it. Who cares about African history? We want to glorify ourselves and Europeans. So, which again is nonsense. And yes, they're still doing it. That is one of the other things that I sadly occurred to me when I was reading this book is, yeah, particularly this is being filmed in November of 2021. So yeah, things are pretty turbulent right now. And things have gone very, very crazy. And it's, yeah, I was around, obviously, during the Black Lives Matter protests, which were justified. Completely justified. The United States, unfortunately, is still very, very racist. And it's very, very sad. And they are fighting to not have books like this in their library. This would probably infuriate a lot of these people because this tells tales they don't want told, that need to be told. So, as a homeschooler, this is one of the various cornerstones of why I personally choose to homeschool, is so I can teach this. This book, this is a library copy. I will probably eventually buy this book because this is the type of book I want in my library, in my child's library. So they are aware that this history exists. White as we may be, this is history. And it's important to be aware of and to look at and to know about. And particularly this as a jumping off point, because this also has a this has a bibliography. It has a source. It has source material in here. So it literally has source notes and a bibliography. So it tells you where they got this information. So you have a book on Frederick Douglass's papers. You have a book on the Arthur Schomburg, because Arthur is what he adopted as a European name. Various archives and various other things. So there's about 4 or 5 sources here. So, and as well as a complete record of his life. So this is a great jumping off point, particularly if you're looking at Audubon or Beethoven and looking at those histories and their influence into African, or technically African because Beethoven was European, history. So, and looking at various heroes. And hopefully this library is now on my list of things to visit if I ever manage to get to New York, which yes is on my list despite the fact that I do not like large cities. I have a trip to make to Ellis Island because I have family that came through it not that long ago. So, in this case, German Swedes. So, that is it for this book review. I really like this book. I cannot recommend this enough. Probably one of the best African American books that I have. Definitely for the older ages. You can probably read it to younger kids, but they're not going to get it. And they're not. Unless they're really, really patient and really, really interested, 6 or 7 would be the absolute youngest for this. High school students might find this book interesting. I found it inspiring and a very good jumping off point for research when you're looking into different characters and understanding of African American history and the history of whitewashing our U.S. history and European history in general. So this does what, in a short picture book, what the creator of It's About meant to do with his career and his life's work, was to deal with this whitewashing. So that's the end of this review. If you like what you see, be sure to like and subscribe. I do cover a lot of African American history because it interests me and I think it's important. I cover other picture books. I cover various films. Mentally yawning. As well as a variety of stuff. I also do some homeschooling stuff and some kids travel stuff because we are a secular homeschooling family. So that is where my mind is at when I'm reviewing a lot of these books, is how this can be worked into education or how it can be enjoyed by children reading. So be sure to like and subscribe. Thank you.